Middle class in Africa, in South Africa as well, is a barometer of how the economy is doing. It's a barometer of socio-economic progress. The absence of a middle class in any country means that the country is not making progress. So this is very important. And it plays different roles. It's a source of democratic institutionalization. It's a source of consumption to keep growth going. It's a source of entrepreneurship. There are many benefits to having a growing middle class.
Now, what sort of income levels and assets are associated with being middle class?
In terms of assets, it's housing ownership, car ownership, other hard assets like TVs, mobile. Everyone is a mobile phone. Now I can't still say mobile phone. Maybe I should just say iPhone, higher end of it. Access to services as well, water, electricity, whoever can afford those counts as middle class. In terms of income bands, you are looking at a core middle class, people living on at least $4 to $20 a day, American dollars. And these are what you call purchasing power parity dollars. I apologize for the economic terms, but it allows us to have a ruler for comparing countries. But then we also have a floating middle class, those living below that band at $2 a day to $4 a day. This is per person. And the total is about 300 million people, of which half are in the floating middle and are prone to shock, so they can fall back into poverty. But the remainder, the lower and upper middle class, is quite stable.
And in Africa, how is the middle class doing in terms of affording equal educational opportunities for both boys and girls?
Not too well, I'm afraid. Progress is being made. There's still a gender bias in favor of boys, but also this is driven by certain cultural nuances, sometimes religious issues that come in the way that discourage the progress in terms of the girl child. So this is still an issue to be dealt with, but we're quickly aware, and we show in the book that achieving gender equity, gender progress is key to building a stable middle class.
And then in terms of middle class jobs, in terms of occupations, what are we seeing? Where are we seeing women occupying roles and men occupying roles?
Men tend to be in the higher echelons of most of the professions, and women then tends to be second tier. So this is the issue about the glass ceiling. And then women tend to be more on the support type jobs, which are equally important, but then pay slightly less. And the issue is, how do we get an even keel across the gender so that both genders can have equal access to opportunity, and that's good for society, is good for creating a stable middle class.
It's interesting that you say that, because even in your more developed economies, you have situations where there is equal access to education, and yet when it transitions to the workplace, you still see men at the upper echelons, and then you get specks of women at the top. Why is that?
Sometimes this is baffling, but perhaps we have to look at what we call social capital, that because of the networks and the networking institutions, men have an advantage when it comes to networking, and those are critical. That's critical social capital for advancing in a profession. It's about who you know, the right people, the right places. There's a whole mentorship system among men which is stronger and larger than that for women. That's part of the reason. Maybe that's not the only reason, of course.
And now we want to come to South Africa. In South Africa, we always hear that it's important for us to promote entrepreneurship, because that's what's going to actually help boost the economy. Once we do that, to what extent will that actually help bring people up into the middle class? Oh
yes, entrepreneurship promotion is critical, and it's not easy, by the way. 1 in 5 businesses fail easily, if not more than that. Doesn't mean that if you start, you'll succeed. It's very tough. You have to create an entrepreneurship ecosystem, which is about the training, is about the support for the entrepreneurs, is about, in terms of mentoring, is about the support financially, is about giving them further skills to grow their businesses. There's a whole ecosystem that needs creating for entrepreneurship to be successful. Once entrepreneurs are successful, they create jobs for themselves and for others, and that's very good for job creation, but always creating this middle class.
And then I want to talk about the issue of politics and governance. Does a middle-class person who lives in urban Joburg vote differently to somebody who lives in a rural town somewhere in Durban?
Absolutely. That's what we're finding across Africa. And across Africa, we're finding that people in the rural area tend to stick with what they know. And often is with long-standing liberation parties. It cuts right across Africa. In the urban areas, people are beginning to experiment with new parties, new ideas, parties that are preaching reform, parties that are preaching inclusion, and are preaching less of nationalism. Nationalism is often associated with liberation parties, which is important in its own right, but quite clearly there is a difference. And I think for most politicians, they know that the most stable and most loyal voters are in the rural areas. For any party, if you can break through, people tend to be loyal as consistent voters.
Do you think perhaps that's why we saw in the latest national elections that Gauteng, the ANC didn't do so well in Gauteng, because presumably they're more middle-class people who think differently?
Absolutely. As a phenomenon that we see across the world, across Africa, I was not surprised that the urban sector tends to experiment with new ideas, with new parties, and it's easy for them to abandon a long-standing party of liberation. It just means that there needs to be a messaging, perhaps an agenda that begins to speak to their needs, to win them back into the fold.
Barring the negative headlines around Ebola and some sort of perception that the whole of Africa is ridden with Ebola, Africa is considered to be the frontier in terms of investment and growth. With a growing middle class across the continent, what does it mean for economic growth in the next 20, 30 years?
By year 2020, African middle class will account for something like 2.5 trillion worth of consumption. So it is a source of consumption. That's what will deliver sustainable growth in Africa in the first place and create opportunities for corporates. I look at the expenditure pattern of a typical household in Ghana, which is in the book, by the way. They are spending most of their money on food and non-alcoholic beverages, followed by transport, then followed by services, electricity, and so forth, and water and so forth. So it's quite clear that this is where we need to impact. But of course, there's opportunity in terms of building household balance sheets through housing ownership. So anyone who's going to go into mortgage finance in Africa will make a good ton of money, as well as food, as well as power and electricity. But the middle class is key for Africa's progress and for attracting foreign direct investment. Not to mention institution building. I talked earlier, they contribute to institutions. The middle class contributes to demanding better services. And I must say this, that the biggest driver of people getting into the middle class is education. So investing in education is critical for creating a stable middle class.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your time.